I'm Sharon Israel, and this is Planet Poet Words in Space. My guest today is award-winning Canadian poet Lisa Richter, here to talk about and read from her highly acclaimed poetry book, Nautilus and Bone, about the poet Anna Margolin. Also joining us later in the show will be Planet Poets, Poet at Large, Pamela Manché Pearce. Hello, Lisa.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Sharon?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm going to read your bio. Lisa Richter is a Canadian poet, writer, and educator. She is the author of 2 books of poetry, Closer to Where We Began, Tightrope Books, 2017, and Nautilus and Bone, Frontenac House, 2020, the winner of the National Jewish Book Award for Poetry, the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Poetry, and the Robert Kroetsch Award for Poetry. Her poems have been nominated for the Best of the Net and a National Magazine Award and appeared in numerous publications and anthologies, including the Literary Review of Canada, CV2, the Malahat Review, the New Quarterly, Rogue Agent, and Crab Creek Review. Lisa lives and writes in Toronto. So, Lisa, this is an extraordinary book, and I was wondering if you want to open with a poem or tell us a tiny bit about the poem in the book before you start.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's just such a pleasure and an honor to be here in this space with you, and your kind words really mean a lot to me. So having said that, I'll start with Mother of Exiles, Ellis Island, 5 December 1906, which works with or engages with the poet Anna Margolin's arrival in New York City at the turn of the last century. Mm-hmm. She was born and raised in what is now modern-day Belarus and arrived as a young woman in New York in 1906. The poem begins with an epigraph from Emma Lazarus's iconic poem, The New Colossus. And the epigraph reads, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles." Mother of Exiles. From the deck railing, she swims into focus. Feature by feature, oh, Madame Liberté, it is I, not you, the brazen giant of Ms. Lazarus. How long have you been waiting? Whose books do you clutch to your apple green breast? Gold frayed in morning's unguarded alchemy. With a torch incendiary in your other fist, your hands are occupied. Dark lady, I'm tired, not poor, though I've nothing to show but gestures toward bankrupt agony, water marble topography threatening to plague me until my death. How can I give you what I am too weak even to name? Mute goddess, does your arm throb from your ideals held aloft? From the gulf between what's lived and what's spoken? You cannot reach me, and I cannot laurel your face in my hands, much as I yearn to. Not after a fortnight aboard the SS Finland, my insides tipped in a glass bottle, pummeled by tantruming storm, all rupture and enjambment, now coming to dock. Will you lift your golden lamp to guide the 1,000 peacock eyes festooning my taffeta train? Or will you keep your light turned inward, as I fear you've learned? Disrobe, pale matriarch. Abandon your tired post. Let us rescue each other from crone-like brambles. New worlds, ebb and swarm.
That's Lisa Richter reading Mother of Exiles, Ellis Island, 5 December 1906, from her book, Nautilus and Bone. And this is a conversation between, or an address by Anna Margolin and you to the Statue of Liberty. There's a three of you in there.
Mm-hmm. I hadn't thought of it. Actually, four of us, because I think Emma Lazarus is part of the conversation too.
Yes, you take her words. Yes, there's four of you in there.
I actually never thought of it that way before, because I always just thought about the dialogue between me and Anna Margolin, or Rosa Lebensbaum as she was born.
There's another layer.
It's an additional layer.
Oh my goodness. That's beautiful. Would you talk a little bit about who is Anna Margolin and how you found her, Lisa?
So the story goes back to a reading that I did in Toronto in, I think, 2015 or 2016, where I was reading the work of the late, great poet Adrienne Rich. And I believe that's where I first encountered Anna Margolin, because I think Rich had translated one of her poems. Mm-hmm. And it left quite an impression on me, not just because of the poetry itself, which felt so ahead of its time and so fresh and so striking and so powerful, but just the name of the poet, because my great-grandfather's original surname was Margolin, which he later changed to Lipitsky when he was immigrating from Russia in order to avoid anti-Semitism, because I guess Lipitsky sounds less Jewish to Russian era. I don't know. But anyway, even though I later discovered that Anna Margolin was a pseudonym for her, which she adopted after actually trying on a number of different pseudonyms mm-hmm. during her career as a poet and as a journalist in New York in the early 20th century. Even though that was never her real name, it felt to me like a sign or a serendipitous, synchronistic moment of connection and conversation with this writer who embodied the kind of wild, uninhibited, transgressive, rebellious, revolutionary feminism and just defiance of gender norms that just spoke to my soul. And so I encountered Anna Margolin's work again when I was doing a writing retreat at Sage Hill, which is a workshop program and an incredible writing retreat center based in Western Canada, in Saskatchewan. And when I was asked by our wonderful mentor, George Eliot Clark, to write a 2-page play in verse, Anna Margolin was the character that jumped to mind. And
that's so the beginning.
That was the beginning. And so the sonnet sequence that's in the collection actually began as a play between Anna Margolin and her third and eventual husband or common law spouse, Reuben Iceland. And so that's how that sonnet sequence actually began, as a play.
Fascinating evolution of what you're doing. There's so many layers upon layers. The fact that it's a common practice for Jewish people to change their names sometimes, and poets to change, and people who are poets to change their names to something that's more poetic, let's say, or different. But would you read the poem Rosa into Anna, which is about Rosa changing her name to Anna Margolin?
Sure. Rosa to Anna. I did not hate my name, only felt myself imprisoned in roses, in the violence of thorns. O Rosa, thou art sicker than Blake's invisible worm. No howling storm to fly in the night, only a howling in the heart's cold grotto, a crawling of the wormed apple, the sugar plum overture to a funeral march. Oh, how I choked on my mother's perfume, her fears, awful musk, too dense for even the heaviest of florals to mask. Anna, sweet palindrome, the Latin form of the Hebrew Hannah. Anna, a name to bathe in, a name that does not give me whiplash each time I hear it. Anna, elemental in its frequency. Anna, everywhere in this Babel labyrinth of cities shimmering with derelict oil and muffled lust. Anna warms your hands in hers by an iron hearth. Anna rocks you to milk-drunk sleep. Anna, the flavor of kosher salt, liverwurst, pickles, beer, chicken schmaltz. Anna, the wind snap of calico shirtwaists and aprons on clotheslines, from fire escapes and tenement windows, shameless and fluttering. Anna, the dirt packed beneath the nails of the huntress. Anna, ochre roots tendrilled deep into Bronx asphalt. Anna, with each reach and twist, tunneling deeper. Anna, into the belly of this new world, my words are wilding.
That's Lisa Richter reading Rosa into Anna. What a paean to Anna. And the anaphora, which is another form of Anna that you start, it's an incantation of Anna.
Mm-hmm.
So you imbibe it with such imagistic richness, which I'm sure our listeners will understand that that's not an easy thing to do. And the imagery is so intense and intricate, but I find very emotionally accessible. So thank you for that, Lisa.
Thank you.
Anna is a Yiddish poet, which sort of marginalizes, we talked about marginalization of a woman, of a poet, and then of a Yiddish poet. There are more layers and nesting of the layers of alienation, perhaps. But you are a non-Yiddish speaker. How do you relate to her Yiddishness? Did she write in Yiddish?
So that's a great question. Anna Margolin wrote in Yiddish, and it was a very specifically aesthetic and political choice on her behalf to do that. She was a Russian speaker. She spoke many other languages. She's Hebrew and English and probably German, but Yiddish was the language that she chose to write in. And it was the language of the Jewish diaspora. It was the language of conversation. It was the language of oral traditions passed down from generation to generations of women in Russia and in the Ashkenazi Jewish traditions. And for me, in my case, as you mentioned, I am not a Yiddish speaker, though it was actually my late father's first language. And as a child, I never learned Yiddish in school. We never spoke it at home. The only exposure that I had to it was occasionally hearing it spoken by my grandparents when we used to visit them in Montreal, or in the choir that I sang in elementary school. But I felt like it was kind of denied to me because it kind of represented the past, and it kind of represented a past that new generations and immigrant generations wanted to move forward from and not hold on to. And I felt in some ways that it was a legacy that was always there for me, but denied to me in a particular way. And so when I encountered the English translation of Anna Margolin's one and only book that she ever published, I was mesmerized by it. And it felt like a doorway for me. It felt like a portal, not only into the past, into this life of a poet who lived more than 100 years ago, but into my own personal past and into my own ancestry, to a life that had been possible, but was never available to me. And so it was kind of like this braiding, this entwining of our two lives and destinies, even though they never actually touched. It felt like this connection, or this wonderful dialogue that I was invited to partake in.
You were invited. Yes, I feel that way too. You accepted the invitation. And you also embraced the Lower East Side. Well, your imagery of the Lower East Side was so clear, and you do write with a lot of passion. So thank you. And I want to reintroduce my guest, award-winning Canadian poet Lisa Richter, here to discuss Nautilus and Bone, for which she won the National Jewish Book Award for Poetry. I just want to read a little bit of that, of the comments of the jurors, I guess, who gave you the award for the National Book of Poetry. In Nautilus and Bone, Lisa Richter races around the life and work of Yiddish language poet Anna Mongolan until her words are wilding. That's the last line of the poem. The poetry supersedes the mere biographical and showcases the triumph of the genre in many forms that we'll be discussing. Language flaunts itself across history with epigraph ranging from Lorca to Lizzo. The collection memorizes Margolin's legacy across time. Richter's exhilarating achievement doesn't merely bring Margolin to life, it dares the reader to live as fully as Margolin. And that's what you're bringing to us today, Lisa. So I really, really appreciate that. And would you now read another poem that is one that poet speaks to poet?
So I'll read this one. Yeah. So the primeval murderess talks back to the poet.
Yes.
Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yes. Thank you.
So this poem was written in response to Anna Margolin's poem, Primeval Murderous Night, in which the speaker of my poem directly addresses hers. And it was written in the form of the golden shovel, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with. But for those who aren't, it was developed by the poet Terence Hayes as an homage to Gwendolyn Brooks, and takes a line from the original poem and uses each one of those words as the end word in the new poem's lines itself. So in mine, I start with two epigraphs, one from the anarchist Emma Goldman, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution." And the second from Lizzo, "I just took a DNA test. Turns out I'm 100% that bitch." And that's from her song, Truth Hurts. The primeval murderess talks back to the poet. "Not a dram of blood have these hands spilled. To you, I read primeval, from the Latin prima venis, early in life, youthful. Would a murderess weave her hair into a coronet of foxglove, carouse away the night in the city's armored paunch until her shoes crumble, grope in the dark for her sister's hands? I've been known to worship a mother I wasn't born to, but would come to love as my own, not out of desire to commune with alpine blossom or timber wolf, but the necessity of loosening the slip knot pressing my throat. Lady, I don't need your help. The cracked pedestal where in your earnest rage you've mounted me. Spare me your drink of tears, your bread of shame. Do not beg me to seduce, devour, bewitch, enmesh. I've no time for such meshuggahs. If you want him, no more greed-crazed gulps from promised streams. Why ensnare when you can entrance? Why pummel and thrash? Invite him to meet you in the ring, only your vanquished pride to swallow. If at midnight you rise, glazed with a somnambulist's grace, take him to my secluded forest, to the star-drowned beach, where the ocean's a hound, baying to storied gods, restless as thieves. Surround him, waltz him in circles into the unfurling sea, minding stones that threaten to ribbon your feet. Sirens whose swan songs will singe you to death.
That's the primeval murderess talks back to the poet. And what was the name of Anna's poem?
Anna's poem was called Primeval Murderous Night. Yeah.
So you're talking to Anna, and the murderess is talking to you and Anna. We can go on and on. I love loosening the knot at the neck.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me how this poem relates to the rest of the book? Relates to your feelings about Anna and how you felt when you wrote this?
I remember when I wrote this poem, how I wanted to loosen, so to speak, or chip away at any kind of iconic, or I'm trying to think of the right word, solidified image of femininity, of this kind of iconoclastic femininity that Margolin references, and demystify and devilify the murderous character,
Yes.
who I saw as being fundamentally misunderstood, misinterpreted, and rewrite, remythologize, reclaim, recreate the story that Margolin tells. So there are two actual phrases in italics in the poem, your drink of tears and your bread of shame, that come from Margolin's poem, Primeval Murderous Night. And so what I wanted to do with those phrases, which may sound a little bit cliche to modern ear, is to subvert them and to challenge myself, to challenge the speaker in Margolin's poem to engage with each other in kind of this dance, or this kind of this kind of dance with each other. And there is a lot of dancing in the book. There is a lot of dancing in the epigraphs of this poem, with the Lizzo quote, with the Emma Goldman quote. And there's a famous fairy tale, I believe it's called, what's it called? The 12 Sisters. Do you know that one, where the 12 sisters go off at night and they dance all night, and then their slippers are worn in the morning, and no one knows why.
And they turn into swans, correct?
They turn into swans. I believe it's a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, though I could be mistaken. But that was also another intertextual level or layer that I wrote into. And how it relates to the rest of the collection, I think, is in the physicality and the challenge that the speaker lays down in a way, not just for the reader, but for Anna Margolin herself, as a figure that I'm trying not to idolize or idealize or fetishize in any way. So it's just being honest, being raw, being unflinching, being real. Those are things that are important to me as a poet, and
thank you. That's
to me
great.
As a reader.
Yeah. I'm still have in my mind too the Statue of Liberty being addressed in such a way.
Right.
How unusual that is, you know.
Well, she's not the only sculpture in the book that I am addressing either.
Oh, right. You talk about
Rodin sculpture, Danaid, that I remember I first saw in Paris when I was in my early 20s. At the Rodin Museum, and I was absolutely mesmerized by this, the sensuality of Rodin's lines and marble that were so organic and so so animated and so flesh-like. And so that became a kind of pivotal point for me to write about, sort of weaving my own experience into Margolin's, who I mean, she was in Paris for a short time as well. And so that became another opportunity to engage with myth.
You're listening to Planet Poet Words in Space. I'm Sharon Israel here with my guest Canadian poet, Lisa Richter. And now it's time for Pamela Manché Pearce, our poet at large. Pamela is a Pushcart Prize nominated poet. She also makes visual art, and 3 collages from her series Skin Hunger, created in response to the pandemic, have just been published in Paris Lit Up magazine in Paris, France. Hi, Pamela.
Hello, Sharon. Hello, Lisa. It's wonderful to be here today in every way. Wonderful to be here. And I have to thank you, Lisa, not only for your gorgeous poetry, which I'm just in it with you, and I am you've got me in there with you, and also to thank you for synchronicity, which I'm feeling in a variety of ways, and it really is a great way to lead me into what I'm going to be talking about today. So I love it when that happens. As poet at large on Planet Poet Words in Space, and here I am again, I have been exploring the connection between poetry and other art forms for a series I call Cross-Pollination. Those of you who listened to the show the last time know that I talked about the debate over the value of poetry versus painting. This was first written about, that we know of, by the ancient Greek lyric poet Simonides, who said, "Poetry is a speaking picture, painting a silent poetry." And as often happened in history, a Roman picked up where a Greek had gone before and really paved the way. And the Roman lyric poet Horace picked up on that phrase and wrote, "On pictura poesis," as is painting, so is poetry. This put him on the map, so to speak, and made him famous. It has been spurring arguments that are still alive and going strong. And if you look this up, I was amazed when I worked on this show that there are people are still writing about this and they're using that phrase. And I always imagine, it's true. And I always imagine seeing a bunch of poets and artists drinking it well into the night and still trying to thrash this out. And it's like a battle that they're having. At the end of that segment, I shared my fantasy that poetry and painting moved in together and had a baby. And they named that baby Ekphrasis. I ended my segment promising to take a look at ekphrastic poetry for a future show. The future is now. Ekphrasis in Greek means to describe. And why does that matter today? Why does that matter now? Because this is a show about poetry. And ekphrasis, or describing, is an important element in every poet's toolbox. There are many definitions of ekphrasis, and there are just as many ways of saying that word. So they'll be going some back and forth with this. One of the definitions is a vivid description of a scene, or more commonly, a work of art that is a literary device. And then I have to say to myself, but who would want to spend their time describing another art form, an art form other than their own, poets? Because all artists are self-starters, and poets very, very much so. We're constantly trolling for material to get our motors started. We use prompts and exercises and all sorts of things to take with us when we sit out at our desks and we're not sure where to begin or how to start. We read the obituaries and racing forms. We reminisce about our third grade teacher's blue necklace. We look at family photos or wonder what our cats are thinking, because that may lead us somewhere. For certain poets, no names mentioned here, contemplating a spoon could put them to work instantly. It's all material. It all leads us to something, and it will all wind up inspiring our work. Focusing on the art of others, painting, sculpture, movies, music, TV, to create poetry does something else. It helps us interact with those other artists who can inspire us, our kindred spirits in our solitary work. And there's both comfort and deep connection in that. It's a form of cross-pollination between genres. Those Greeks, I sometimes think they invented everything that interests me. And of course, ekphrastic poetry began with them over 2,000 years ago. No surprise. When epic poets were using ekphrasis to aid audiences in visualizing legendary battles. These poets created inargias, or vivid word paintings, like the Iliad, for example, which carries a very detailed description of Achilles' shield. Homer, the blind poet and its author, never saw the actual shield, so he made it up in his imagination, notionally. as were most of the scenes and objects described in epic poetry. These poets tried and often succeeded in turning the verbal into the visual. Ekphrastic poetry, in broad terms, is when a poet has a literary response to something other than a literary work. But there are actually 4 types. Ekphrastic poetry, about a work of art. Actual ekphrasis, writing about an artwork that exists. Notional ekphrasis, writing about an imagined work of art. And accessible, actual ekphrasis, writing about a work that once existed and is now lost, destroyed, or far away. Over thousands of years, poets like us have been finding different ways of interacting with art, visual and every other kind too, influencing us, connecting us, and helping us appreciate and understand the work of other artists, leading us over and over to fascinating discoveries and new ways of art. But we're not just describing, and our readers enjoy our emotional responses, our fresh takes, and personal points of view. Like Lisa, in probably the most famous ekphrastic poet ever written, John Keats, in Ode to a Grecian Urn, directly addresses the figures on this artifact. Many, many, many poets have worked with visual art. And I found it very interesting as I looked into this subject that the most popular visual artist for this type of work is Peter Bruegel, the 16th century Dutch Renaissance painter, known for his plain, truth-telling work that may be the reason it inspired so many poets like William Carlos Williams, W.H. Auden, and John Berryman, to name a very few. So on and on, we find new sources. Lisa put right in my lap today.
Really fantastic.
Statue of Liberty. I can't believe that. I loved it. I loved what you did with it, Lisa. So now we just are on our way to finding all sorts of new sources. I know I wrote one of my favorite poems that is, and it's anthologized, is My TV Family, about watching TV, and I put that into my work. So what we know is that we're all together making art, helping other artists, and inspiring one another on a daily or a monthly basis. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. You know, it's so fascinating
to be poet at large and bring my cross-pollination to the airwaves once again. And thank you, Lisa. Thank you for inspiring me after hearing your gorgeous work today and handing me the Statue of Liberty.
That was something.
It doesn't get better than that. So thank you both.
Thank you. That was really so informative and great. Lisa's work is very organically ekphrastic. It's
exactly
like you're searching for something to respond to. It's there. It's in the mix. It's in that right. world that you've created.
Right. It's really in her toolkit.
Thank you, Pamela.
I'm just so honored by that.
Fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm really honored. Thanks so much, Pamela.
My pleasure. And now I'm just going to be a listener.
Pamela Manché Pearce, poet at large. Thank you. I have my brain is like exploding now, more than it was before.
Yeah, mine too. I was taking notes during that talk, Pamela. So
that's wonderful. I appreciate that, Lisa.
To them later. Yes.
Let's see what you do with it. We'll all have to see.
All right. You never know.
All right. Now I'm going to listen. Bye-bye.
Hi, Pamela. I'm back with Lisa Richter, Canadian poet of Nautilus and Bone. What poem would you like to read now? We have one before the end poem. And you've written many forms in this book.
I have.
And they're all, again, organically compatible with one another. And they all further the intensity of the book and inform the meaning, if you want to say, of what you're doing.
So there were two that I was considering, so maybe I'll get your feedback on this, Sharon.
Okay.
I was either thinking of reading the last section of Jewess or reading one of the sonnets.
Why don't you read one of the sections of Jewess? the passion involved in that, in the search for identity and clarification of identity and demythologizing identity, I think is important.
Maybe I'll actually just read the first section of Jewess. How does that sound?
Sounds fine.
Okay. 1. Don't call me Jewess. Call me hellfire and fish hooks. The moon as it violets the earth in mollusk silver shadow, papered with yellow envelopes and wheat. Call me pale skins stretched into backlit sails. Call me opium, milk rose, a comet saliva trail spittling the blue globe. Call me abacus. Call me the bespoke noose you wind in loops around your fingers. The tangerine light that shimmies through curtains as evening sidles in steady advance towards you. The burnished apple's high scarlet gloss, a windpipe's hollow moan. Call me newsreel, hollyhock, sundial, astrolabe, the peacock's shimmering cyanide blues and gangrene greens. The rusted latch from the outhouse door that claws open and warms to your calloused clasp. An iodine sunset swelling across a wound.
That's Lisa Richter reading a section from her multi-sectioned Jewess. You gather the identity that can be shared by you and Anna and all of us. So I find it very inclusive. What you're doing is very inclusive. So I don't know.
That means so much to me. That really does, especially because inclusivity is something that's really important to me as a person and as an artist, as a writer. When I wrote this poem originally, it wasn't in any one particular person's voice. I wasn't writing specifically in the persona of Anna Margolin yet. At this stage, it came out as kind of a composite of both myself and a speaker who may have existed in another time. But the poem was really driven by the nouns in it. It was really driven and initiated, I think, by the form of the list poem with the anaphora, the repetition of call me. And when I started doing, sorry, go on.
No, the word Jewess. Somebody wrote an Italian history and he mentioned he talked about a Jewess, and I found it very, as a Jewish person, I found it. I trembled with something I didn't like. Now, of course, in that time, Jewish women were referred to as Jewesses, but there's something very other about that.
Much in the same way that ending, that suffix, that ESS, was applied to women of other minority identities, and the way that word both limited and diminished and reduced women into others, into this sort of objectified kind of identity, into that presence. And so in Western art, as I discovered in the 19th century and earlier, Jewish women were perceived in that particular way as this kind of like dark, mysterious, yet also possibly evil, yet possibly also kind of
exotic,
seductive, exotic, right? And so that's kind of the other impetus, right? Exactly. So kind of to reclaim the word as much as to negate it. So for me, there's a tension between that. There's this tension between wanting to embrace the identity that I was you could say that I was born with, or that was assigned to me arbitrarily, and simultaneously rejecting it, personalizing it, challenging it. When I think about subject matter in a poem, I really write about something. I'm more interested in writing into something. And when you think about writing into something, I think about like putting your hands in the earth and overturning it and seeing what you come up with, as opposed to encircling it or writing around a subject. I really want to write into one. And so that's what this poem felt like.
I like that. I like that. It's sort of getting your hands at one with the earth too, if I may. I want to ask you, if people are interested in finding your book, where should they go for that?
The best place would probably be the Frontenac House website for the publisher who published this collection, or any independent bookseller would probably be able to order it. It's a little bit more difficult, or it might take a little bit longer in the States than in Canada, but the publisher's website, Frontenac House, I believe it's .com, would probably be the easiest way to do that.
Yeah, and Frontenac, like the Frontenac Hotel in Quebec.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Lisa, would you end with the final poem in the collection?
Yes.
And
go ahead, sorry.
This has so much in it. We describe Anna's life, which was very tumultuous and filled with drama and husbands and poetry and politics. Could you just say a word or two about the poem before you begin it?
Yeah. So after Anna Margolin published her one and only collection of poetry, which was simply titled Poems in 1929, she faded a little bit into obscurity. She published a few poems in literary magazines after that, but not very much. And prior to the publication of her own book, she had actually edited a volume of Yiddish language poetry in the early 20s. And she felt very rejected by the literary establishment in New York after having done all that work with them and getting very little recognition for the actual poetry that she published herself. Although ironically in Warsaw, which was another hub of Jewish literary culture at the time, she did receive recognition. So she felt very ignored and misunderstood and rejected, and eventually retreated almost into complete silence.
Oh dear.
You know, it is a really kind of tragic story in a way. You know, I wish I could have that happy ending to the book, but I didn't want to do that. I thought that, you know, if I had ended the book on the love affair that she had with Ruben Iceland that ended in like their 20-year relationship, it would have been a little bit too Disney, you know what I mean? Like I didn't want the happily ever after ending. So this really, I think, speaks to her ambivalence and the way that she became something of a recluse. So maybe I'll just read the first section. Does that work for you, Sharon?
Yeah, you can read, right. You can, we have a few minutes, so you can read it.
Okay, great. So this poem is entitled Afterward, the Jewess Plots Her Escape Route. 1. For years, I communed with gods and ghosts, elbow to elbow at the banquet table, blessing the feasts of alternating seasons. So much bounty, we could hear the sculpted legs groaning. In those days, the poems would not relent. Swell after vertiginous swell, my open wounds wild stung with salt. An ice blue pain I came to savor. Across the Atlantic, lustrous men hunched over each other's calfskin volumes who couldn't place my nom de plume, crowed their praise for the volume I'd labored to birth. The local birds I'd flock to, schrijvers whose own work these bloody-knuckled hands helped thrust into light, left me freezing amongst empty milk bottles. My name thinner than gauze, a will-o'-the-wisp with breasts and hard feelings. Still, I coaxed spring's entrance with pan flutes and the yelps of wounded foxes. Hush, all you diabolical critics, each vying for the deepest cut. Beneath the quilted silence, a conch shell's whale song rescinds decrees for my undoing. I look in the mirror, cough up my snarling double. She sticks to the glass and demands compensation. 2. Letter by letter, the poems taper off. I turn to my rose bushes and swallow pure sky, smuggle lungfuls of nightshade and wormwood. The pearls that were my nails fill with nectar and sheep's blood. A certain Mr. Samuel Lipitsky of Montreal asks me to sign a book for his great-granddaughter, who won't be born for decades. I collapse on a bed of prayers and petitions. Let the imprints of my curses and apocryphal curves fill with lamplight and snow. I abandon the shoes I've hobbled in across fissured continents, begging for truth in 6 dialects of a foreign language. Nothing but magpies and vultures, no one but scarecrows and derelicts to taste an anguish so exquisite it shatters sternum and clavicle. Oh, bone fragments growing little wings, take flight.
Mm.
And there's just one more section, if I may.
Yes.
3. Littlest Matryoshka doll, wooden nub of a girl with pancake eyes frozen in wonder. Your absence in my core weighs more than all your sisters combined. Perhaps it is true. I have no regard for the sanctity of mild discomfort. My hands smell of almonds with hints of disappointment. I pen my epitaph, turtle doves pecking at my knees. Space is an illusion shared by those of us always digging ourselves out of early graves. The dance shall commence at the stroke of eternity. I collect the dried tissue paper wings of my most beloved adversaries, clasp them flat to my chest. Who would I be without their familiar sting, the squalid reminder of worlds that cast me from their phallic casts? When I write, she squandered her life on nothing, on rubbish. A certain lightness propels me. Mirage oasis cool water gushing over desert-chapped lips. I'm done rooting in the rubble of bombarded castles. Finally free to snub the ballrooms of normalcy and civic engagement. As my mother used to say, don't send a dog to the butcher shop. You can't empty the ocean with a spoon.
That's wonderful. That's Lisa Richter reading her poem, the end poem from her volume, Nautilus and Bone. Afterward, the Jewess plots her escape route. And I love this line, the dance shall commence at the stroke of eternity. And I think that's a beautiful line for the whole poem. And I thank you so much, Lisa Richter, for joining us today with your beautiful work. It was such a delight, such a pleasure. And thank you, Pamela Manché Pearce, for your wonderful contribution. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for listening.
And thank you, Sharon, for having me. It was a pleasure, just a delight.
Thank you so much.